we have a very small group tonight, so feel free to turn on your cameras and join in, and you don't have to, but if you want to, feel free. And if you have any questions, particularly with a small group like this, I'm very happy to take, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions or pose comments or whatever, or put them in the chat, and I'll make sure that at the end I've caught up with anything that you've asked. But I'm going to share my screen and get started right away. I'm very happy that we are, given the weather, I'm very happy that we're going somewhere warm tonight. Um, there we are. So hopefully you can all see that. And let's get started. I think some of you may know that I travel in Greece a lot because we have a house there. My father's family is Greek, so I spend a lot of time traveling in Greece. And most of the time when I'm there, I like to explore some new place that I haven't been before. And so this program tonight is about two islands that are very, very different from each other in many ways, and also physically, geographically, very far apart from each other. But they're both, one in particular, the second one I'm going to show you is probably, I think at this point I've decided it's my favorite island so far. But there's many, many more that I'll eventually get to, so we'll see. Anyway, to put things on the map, let me turn on my pointer. There we go. When we're in Greece, we're usually down here in the south of the Peloponnese, but tonight we're going to go to two particular islands. We're going to start in Thasos, which is way, way up in the north. And then the second one we're going to visit is called Karpathos, which is one of these yellow ones down here. The reason these are in different colors is that Greece's islands are kind of organized into different cultural and historical groups. There's over 6,000 islands in Greece, most of which are little rocks with nothing on them. There's about 200 islands that are actually inhabited. And the two that we're looking at tonight are going to be the northern Aegean Islands, because that's geographically where they are, and the Dodecanese, which are the yellow ones down here. Dodeca is the Greek word for 12. And historically, they took that name because there were 12 major islands in that area. So that's where the name comes from. The islands that you're probably most familiar with, because they're on the cover of every Greek guidebook or calendar or whatever, are the orange ones here. Those are called the Kyklades. And that comes from the word for circle, because historically the island of Delos, which is right about there, it was thought Delos is a historically important sacred island in ancient Greece, and they kind of thought that the islands formed a circle around that very important island. So that's where the name comes from. And those are the ones that have the churches with the blue domes and the whitewashed houses and all of that. So those are the ones that people tend to visit the most. And so that's why I'm kind of happy to show you some that are a little off the beaten path. And we're going to start in Thasos, which, as I mentioned, is way up north. And this is just to give you a rough idea of how big it is. This is Boston Harbor. So if you were to take Thasos and plunk it in the middle of Boston Harbor, it would pretty much fill it from about, Lynn down to the South Shore. And it's very mountainous. The red line is the areas that I spent. I was there for about three or 4 days a couple of summers ago in August, which is probably the busiest time there. It's not a very big island. There's only about 13,000 people in it, so less than the population of Danvers, in an island that's pretty good size. It's very mountainous, and it's also very close to the mainland, 5 miles, so you can easily see it. This is actually looking from the hills on the mainland across the water to the island off in the distance. The ferry ride to get there takes about 30 minutes, very easy. And as you leave the port, you can see how close it is. But there is no airport on the island, and there's certainly no need for one because it only takes, like I said, maybe half an hour to get there on the ferry. Many islands do have airports, but Thasos does not. And part of that is that it really doesn't have room for one because it's so steep coming out of the ocean. The main town, which you can see here, faces the mainland, and it's a kind of nice little quiet tourist port. Not a whole lot going on there. This is looking down on it from up in the hills, and you can see how green this is when you think of what I mentioned about the Cyclades Islands, the ones with the churches and the blue domes. They're very barren, um, but many of the islands, particularly in the Ionian Islands, as you get towards Italy and the Adriatic Sea, and the further north you go, the more green you will see many of the Greek islands being. This is a nice old style house mansion that's now used by the Port Authority in the harbor. It's a very pleasant little harbor to stroll around, and again, you can see the mainland just off in the distance, very close. I was there, as I said, in August, which is both good and bad. It's a nice, warm summertime to be there, but it's also incredibly busy for tourism. It also, fortunately, happens to be watermelon season, and the Greeks are big into watermelons. It's funny because I don't really like watermelon that much here, but the ones in Greece are much sweeter and have much more flavor. So you'll find people like this guy selling them off the back of trucks during the summer. And this is looking inland towards the mountains. You might think this is just a beach destination, but it's not. It's actually a historic place. They have a wonderful little archaeological museum. Would only take you an hour or so to go through it. And the highlight in their collection is this Kouros statue from about 600 BC. It's quite tall. It's 11 feet tall. And the photo on the left shows it being excavated back, I think it was in the 20, no, actually, the photo says earlier, like around World War One, was when it was actually unearthed. But they have a wonderful collection of exhibits from different time periods in the history of the island, particularly things about ancient Thasos. Here's some more examples. And also from the Hellenistic period here, which was later as you get towards the Roman Empire. And around it, the island was originally colonized by the Phoenicians. But in about the 6th or 7th century BC, they founded a Greek colony there. And you can still see what's left of it. There's not much, but next to the modern port, there's an archaeological site where you can look at the ancient agora. Gold mining and marble quarrying were very big in the old days and made Thasos a very rich island in ancient times. It was very important economically. And you can explore the ruins. As ruins go in Greece, they certainly don't compare to some of the major archaeological sites, but it's kind of fun to see a place that's just very local. They even did have an ancient theater, which has been restored and they still use for performances. And you can see the old fortifications up above the port town and get a nice view out over the island and the Green Mountains and back over to the port. All around is the Aegean Sea, which is very blue, very beautiful, particularly in the summer. And we're going to make a clockwise tour around what, if you remember, is more or less a round island. And if you get to about like 3 o'clock, this is called Salyara Beach. And it's probably the most famous on the island, most famous place anywhere on the island. And as you can see, in August, it's horrible. I definitely want to go back sometime when it's either the spring or the fall. It was completely overrun by Eastern European tourists. It's very close to Bulgaria. So the Turks go there, the Bulgarians go there, the Romanians go there. And I really felt like I was almost one of the few. I went to restaurants, honestly, and people were surprised that I spoke Greek because they were expecting people to speak Ukrainian and Bulgarian and all this other stuff. Other than the summer, it is a much pleasanter place to be. And the beach, I have to say, the beach is gorgeous. It's famous for this pure white sand, which is actually not sand, it's marble. Because of the marble quarries, much of the stone there is tiny, tiny little pieces of marble that, just like regular sand, have been ground down over the millennia, and so it's absolutely pure white. And when you see that against the blue water, it's really stunning, which is why all of these people go there. So I went for about 15 minutes and walked around and left because it was completely unpleasant. This is actually one of the currently working marble quarries because they're still there. It's still a major industry on the island. And you can see some of that here. As you keep going down the East Coast, you go by a number of nice little villages and some beach towns. And eventually you'll get to a place called Aliki, which is there's what you can see in the distance is a little peninsula. And on either side is a very little isthmus that connects it with a beach on either side. And it's a nice place to stop because there are some ruins there that you can explore. They're very old. This goes back again to the Phoenician times around the 6th or 7th century BC. The name of the peninsula refers to the salt pans that you can see there. The salt pans aren't important anymore, but they were for a very long time. And if you stroll around, there's some nice hiking paths that you go all the way around. And this was a major port in the Middle Ages, both shipping out marble to the rest of the Aegean and the Mediterranean, and also shipping salt, which was an important commodity. The site was actually settled and used way up into, I think, the 7th century AD. So there's later ruins as well. This is a Christian church from a much later time period. But as you walk around the peninsula, you can see the remains of the quarries. The level of the sea level in the Mediterranean has changed over time. So some of the salt pans now are actually underwater, but you can see what's left of them, particularly here, all this shallow area here. You can kind of see some lines in there. It's hard to see, but that's where they would let the salt water evaporate in these very, very shallow dugout areas and then scrape out the evaporated salt. Nowadays, there's not much there. It's just a very low-key beach resort with some nice fish restaurants and some Airbnbs that you can stay in. If you continue along the southern part of the island, so like kind of at the bottom, around like 6 o'clock, is one of the major monasteries on the island. This is the holy monastery of the Archangel Michael. And it kind of blends into the mountain, but you can see how it's perched way up here on this cliff. There's really gorgeous views out over the ocean. And it's quite old. It was founded in 1090. So it's coming up on its 1,000-year anniversary in a few decades. It's actually a convent. In Greek, they don't have separate words for a monastery with men and a convent with women. They use the same word. Most of what you see, though, as old as the place is, the buildings that you see today are mostly from the 18th century, but they are very beautiful, traditional Greek Orthodox style. And of course, the highlight is just looking out over the gardens that are perched up over the sea. They have an important relic, which is why a lot of people visit the church. Supposedly, it's a nail from Christ's crucifixion. If you know anything about relics, you know that it doesn't really matter whether they're true or not. What matters is that if you're a church and you have what you can convince people is a relic, it puts you on the map. And so for centuries, people have been making pilgrimages to this little island monastery to see a nail from the crucifixion. You really do need a rental car if you're there. There is bus service, but you'd be hard pressed to rely on it because it's not very convenient. And driving is incredibly easy. And even in the summer, the rental cars weren't very expensive. One thing I did not like, you can see in this photo, is in addition to the cars, they rent these incredibly irritating four-wheelers that wouldn't be so bad if they were electric, but they're not. They stink and they're loud. So I was kind of annoyed at that. Another reason why I want to go back when it's off season. Continuing around the coast, again, off the southern coast, there's a little place called Giola, and it's a natural pool right adjacent to the sea that you can see people jumping into it. It's more impressive when there aren't crowds of people around it, as you can imagine. It was very hot the day I was there. But the view is very impressive. You have to hike all the way down from the road. Um, and again, if you were there by yourself, it would be a wonderful place to go swimming. But when I was there, it was pretty busy. The second largest town on the island is called Liminaria, and that's a newish waterfront resort, again, down on the south coast. Very pretty. And on a bluff over it is a dilapidated old building called the Little Palace. And at the time when it was built, which was right around 1900 or so, it was built by a German mining company that was doing business on the island. And then the mining company went bankrupt, and now there's nothing left but a picturesque ruin. It's kind of a weird little place. Um, and we need to stop for food. So back in town, this is one of my favorite Greek recipes, and it's called pansara salata, which is just beet salad. And like a lot of recipes, there's no one recipe. There are a million different ways that you can make beet salad, but it usually involves vinegar, walnuts, sometimes some Greek yogurt also. Sometimes it's pureed, sometimes it's not, but it's really delicious, particularly when it's hot out. I enjoyed exploring the interior of the island, partly because I just wanted to, but also because most of the tourists that go there don't do that. They're there for the beaches. So if you take only a little time and drive just a few miles into the mountains, you'll have the place to yourself while everybody else is baking in the sun. And a couple of places to visit. One is called Castro, which means castle in Greek. You'll find a lot of villages with that name, usually perched up high where there at one point was a castle. This is a very small settlement, but it's way up high, about 1,500 feet up. And it did have a castle at one point, but now there's just a few houses. The latest census says there is one inhabitant of this town, but when I was there, there were actually several, and even a taverna and a little church, pretty church up on the hilltop. That's what it looks like inside. And the view, you can pretty much see all over the island because it's way up in the center. I don't know how well you can see this in this photo, but you can see there's a long peninsula with a mountain on the end off in the distance. And that is Mount Athos, which is a part of there's three big peninsulas that stick down from the north, and that one is known for being full of Orthodox monasteries. And in fact, it's a special part of Greece that only men are allowed to visit because it's still a very conservative area, and you can take boat cruises around it. And if you're a Greek citizen, or at least a male Greek citizen, you are allowed to visit and tour the monasteries. If you're a foreigner, you can apply to get in and visit, but they limit the number of people. So you usually have to book well in advance. I have never been, but I hope to go at some point. I have friends who live near there, and I hope to go with them someday. Also in this little village, there's this tiny little chapel which was full of bones. In other words, it's not really a chapel, it's an ossuary where after people died, the deceased villagers were, because it's so hard to dig in the ground to bury people, they actually put their bones in there. But it's usually closed unless there's some kind of ceremony going on. The other big town in the mountains is called Theologos. And it used to be the capital at one point, many years ago. It made sense to have the capital there because it was very far inland and protected from pirates. That's not as big an issue anymore, and everybody wants to be on the water. So the more recent development has always been around that area. And it's pretty big. There's about 1,500 people there. This is the church square. And some wonderful little buildings. They have a very nice folklore museum, which I think cost like €1. And I had a great time with the woman who ran it because I was probably the only person there all day. But it shows what a typical home would have been like in the old days with old furnishings. And I don't know if you can tell from this, but because we're so far north in Greece, the style of the both the interior and the exteriors of buildings is very influenced by the Ottomans. Because at one point, for a very long time, the Ottoman Empire was in charge of Greece, among various other empires through the centuries. But their influence was particularly important in the north. The closer you got to Turkey, the more you'd see their influence. So the style of buildings, both inside and out, is very Turkish. But they had some nice, interesting exhibits and household items. And again, here's the outside of the building, where you can very clearly see this style of building with the little beams that hold it up is very typical of something that you'd see in Turkey. There's also a nice stream that runs right through the center of the village with some weird trees, and it makes a nice, cool walk in the summer to stroll along there in the shade. One thing that I missed, I'm not sure I missed it, but there's a Avgustos Taverna in this little village that has plate breaking, which is really, for decades, it has not been a thing in Greek restaurants. But I guess they still do it. And it was not, this particular restaurant wasn't open the day I was there, and I didn't need to do that. Another old ruin on the island back on the south coast. This is a little site called Thimonia, which has a nice little beach. And if you go up into the mountains, there's what's left of a tower. Not much left to see, but the view down over the beach is quite pretty. And back into the mountains. You would be forgiven for not recognizing this as Greek because it is so lush and green. Very, very different from the things that you're used to seeing. This is another pretty little mountain village on the east side called Panagia, which was noteworthy because you can see all the roofs have these slate. They don't use the standard Mediterranean terracotta tiles. Instead, they use these very thin slate roofs. There's a close up. And again, a number of very elegant mansions that are typical of that Turkish Ottoman style. There's even a little cave called the Dragon's Cave. If you walk down about half an hour or so down below, you can stick your head in this little cave way down underneath the village. Back in the old port, we'll have one quick last meal. Here's some homemade moussaka. And this is called a dakos salad, which is actually a very traditional recipe from Crete. But you'll find it in restaurants all over Greece. It has stale bread called rusks, lots of olive oil, olives, usually tomatoes, often cheese, and a variety of other things. And of course, plenty of slow roasted lamb spinning around. And I again left on the ferry. This is looking back as we leave. You can see how high the mountains are looming up over the port. And we were followed all the way back to the mainland by gulls, since they can count on the passengers to feed them. So you can see plenty of them right close up because of people doing this, women giving them French fries. And I doubt you can really see this. I almost couldn't see it, but way off in the distance, there is a shadow. That is the island of Samothraki, which is about 44 miles away to the east as you head towards Turkey. It's another very green island. I haven't been there yet, hope to at some point. And so this, I've kind of outlined it just so you can see where it is, but it was very faint off in the haze. And you actually have heard of it because you've probably seen, if you haven't seen it in person, you've seen pictures of the winged victory of Samothrace, or in Greek, Samothraki, the statue of the winged victory that's in Paris at the Louvre. And that's where it was found. So that's this island here. And you can see Thasos right up close against the mainland. So now we're going to head down to Karpathos, which is about as far away as you can get, way down in the south. There's actually nothing south of Karpathos until you get to Africa. And again, it's about the same size, but really long and skinny instead of round. And I was there for about, how long was I there? 5 days, 5 or 6 days. Um, I went by myself after a trip with some friends and other people, just to kind of be zen and relax for a few days. And it was a perfect place to do that. There's not very many tourists. It's very mountainous. It is not, I will say this, if you are timid about driving, Karpathos is not for the faint of heart. There's very little traffic, but the roads are very narrow, very twisty, and very high. And you can see kind of some examples there. Um, what this says, the translation is basically correct. It says, be careful for the next 50 kilometers. There are dangerous curves. I don't know what Cairns is. It's kind of an odd mistranslation. But you can see how the driving was a bit of a challenge because there are so many cliffs that rock falls are incredibly common. Everywhere you went, there were rocks all over the road. Some were little, some were big, some were really big, like this. Some were this big. And so I had to be a little careful driving because, you can avoid something like this. It's not hard to just drive around this, but it makes you realize that, well, I don't want to be there when it actually comes down. And I kept reminding myself that earthquakes are not very common. But what are the chances? And of course, literally about 3 days after I left the island, there was a major earthquake about 10 kilometers away from the airport, that did some damage on the island. So I was lucky. And I did discover that uh, by the end of the time I was there, that they do actually, the municipality goes through and cleans up the rocks. Maybe once a week, they go and clean off the roads. But with such a big island, they don't do it all the time because um, there's not really that much traffic. There are a lot of goats, though. Here you can see some goats, very agile. And it's also a very windy island, and you can see that from the trees. It's just, there's cliffs, and the wind just comes off the ocean, and everything grows sideways as a result of that. It's greener than you'd expect for a place that's so far south. It has a lot of pine forests, lots of little chapels and churches sprinkled over the landscape. In fact, I've highlighted them here. You wouldn't have guessed if I just quickly flashed that picture at you how many chapels there were in this tiny little valley, many of which are quite old. And most of them are open. You can just walk in and explore them. Some of them are still maintained by the locals. Some are abandoned. Some have beautiful frescoes inside from the Byzantine era. And then there are larger churches like this as well. I stayed in a town called Olympos. Um, I didn't want to be on the beaches with the rest of the tourists. Well, I shouldn't say the rest of the tourists. There really weren't that many of them. I was on this island in May, which is a much nicer time to be in Greece because the weather is quite nice, but it's much less crowded. And the airport on the island is way at the south tip. Remember, it's long and skinny. And the village I stayed in was at the opposite end, way up at the north, and it took about an hour and a half to get there, despite the fact that it was only maybe 50 kilometers. But I wanted to stay there because it's such a beautiful place. The entire island only has about 7,000 people, and Olympos, where I stayed, has only 200. It is very dramatically situated, kind of on a saddle between two hills above the ocean. And it was deliberately built there because, like I mentioned before, a lot of places in the old days were built up in the mountains for safety from pirates. Um, More modern villages are built on the ocean because times have changed, and that's where people want to be. But it was almost entirely pedestrianized. There's no place to put cars, so you park outside the village, and you climb up and down the various alleyways to get in. It has a very distinct style of architecture that is very different from what we saw in Thasos and very different from the Kykladik Islands that I mentioned. Although you'll see some similarities. This place with the red shutters is where I stayed. And something that is very typical of the Dodecanese Islands are these built-in cabinetry, and many of the old houses had beds for with storage built underneath, like storage cabinets. And you climb steps to get into them. And very often, this is a kind of a more modern reproduction, the place that I stayed. But the original old houses very often had one level that would be for the kids, another level for the parents, another level for the grandparents. But most of them do have these beautiful carved woodwork and traditional lace or embroidered draperies. This place was great. Um, you're pretty much looking at the entire place. There was a little bathroom, a bed, a little kitchenette, and then out that door on the left was a little balcony with the most amazing view. I think I paid, well, it was less than $100 US a night for this place. And it was just magnificent. And it faces west. So every night I could just sit there with a cocktail and watch the sunset and my book. Um, if you've seen pictures of Santorini, which I'm sure you have, even if you haven't been there, I really like Karpathos because it reminds me a lot of why everyone goes to Santorini, except nobody goes to Karpathos. So it made me think of what Santorini might have been like, say, 50 or 60 years ago before it really got overrun by cruise ships. This couple runs one of the tavernas in the little square. This is Nikos and Maria. And it turns out he was actually born in Baltimore, but spent most of his life in Greece. And they have two sons, one of whom lives in the village and works with them. The other one, believe it or not, it turns out he's in Boston and he works at the very expensive Greek restaurant called Krasi in Back Bay. And I haven't been there yet. I need to treat myself sometime and go there because I promised I would say hello to him. They also had this great dog. This is Dubby, named after the Harry Potter character, a little Jack Russell who was my friend. Every morning we had breakfast together in the village. This is a look at the village from a little bit further away. It's definitely the most dramatically situated of all the villages on the island. The islands that you can see off in the distance are uninhabited rocks, kind of off to the side. This is the east side of the village, where you drive in. You can see the church in the distance is where the sort of central square is. And then on the other side, again, this is kind of what Santorini is like, with white houses, almost like snow on the cliff tops. And you can also see what's left of windmills. There are windmills all over the island, which makes sense given how windy it is. And they were used to grind mostly grain at points in the past. And this is the view again from my terrace on a nice, warm, sunny afternoon. You can climb all the way up to the top windmills. There's a lot of really nice hiking trails on Karpathos. And so you get a view back down, way down over the village. And this is looking in the other direction. Um, I think I have photos later of, I hiked pretty much all the way down to the end. There's a beautiful cliff top hike that goes down to those mountains a few kilometers away. Because this was May or early May, it was spring, so there were wildflowers everywhere. This is the church, the main square, such as it is, not very big, but it had several little restaurants and the main church with its bell tower. And this is looking down from the church over the village. This is downtown, basically. Not everything was open because it was just before the real summer season started. And this is the inside of the church, as well as its carved doorway. There's a lot of something that's pretty specific to the Dodecanese islands are these little details where they have different multicolored woodwork on the balconies and also carvings that you'll see on the houses themselves. Particularly this you won't see this in Santorini. This is pretty much unique to the Dodecanese. These plaster carvings that are used on balconies and then painted elaborate colors. This is a dinner that I had in that little taverna with the dog. This is a local specialty from this island, very simple. They're called macarones, and they're kind of like gnocchis. They're they're not really pasta. They're just water and flour, nothing else. And they serve them with caramelized onions and the local cheese. So that's what's on top. Little carafe of wine. And these are lucumades, which are kind of like donut holes. They're very similar. Around here, we off at festivals, you'll often see fried dough. They're they're very similar to fried dough, except round instead of flat. And they serve them with honey and sugar, usually, and sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or nuts. And just some other scenes around the village. I am going to take you to the rest of the island in just a sec, but I want to show you some other typical interiors around the village and some typical locals. Many of the local women, particularly the older ones, still dress in their traditional outfits every day, not just for celebrations. The younger people don't do it as much. Here I am with Dobby, my morning ritual. And a typical breakfast. This is me with just Greek coffee and some fried cheese with lemon juice sprinkled on top. It was very homey. And a lot of people who do bother to go to this island would probably be more likely to stay on the beaches. And so for me to stay almost an entire week in this village meant that after like the second day, I was family. And every time I came home in the evening, parked my car and walked back into the village, everybody wanted to know, where'd you go? What did you see? Like, where are you eating dinner tonight? It was very nice. Um, this was one of my dinners, just a traditional Greek salad with some pita bread and wine, more lucumades, and roast lamb with some potatoes and fava beans, which is I love fava beans. The Greeks usually eat them pureed with a little bit of vinegar and sometimes capers and garlic and onion mixed in. Wash it down with plenty of wine. I really loved the peace and quiet in this place. There were a good number of tourists, but they usually came during the day and only stayed a couple of hours, looked around, and left. So for the most part, it was very peaceful, very quiet. There is supposed to be a folklore museum in Olympos, but it was always closed. In fact, it looked like it had never actually opened, but so I never got to see the inside of it. But I did meet some locals. This is Sophia. I walked by her house frequently, and so at one point she invited me in, insisted on taking me in to see what her house looked like, to have a drink. And this is her house. So this is not a folklore museum. This is actually Sophia's traditional house, and you can see um, the typical kind of woodwork that was in the place I stayed. Although this is an actual home, so she has family photos plastered all over everything, and this is the place where she and her husband sleep up there. Some more of the local life. quiet life does still exist here, although it gets busy in the summer. If you went back in July or August, there definitely would be more tourism. The paved road that I took that goes all the way from the south of the island was only completed in 1978. So that's within our lifetimes, but at the same time, when you think that that isn't that long ago, that this village really, at that point, prior to that, the only way to get to this village was by boat and or donkey over gravel paths. There was no paved road whatsoever. So the whole north part of the island still has a very isolated feel to it. This is an example of what used to be a road. It's great exercise for the knees if you like hiking. But this is the beginning of one of the paths that goes heads down to the villages in the south of the island. There are cats, of course, everywhere in Greece. This was a good example of that kind of decoration that I mentioned, although much more elaborate um, than some of the other places you've seen so far, and more food. This is roast goat and eggplant salad, cold eggplant salad that was very nice in the hot weather with some white wine. Stuffed grape leaves and fava beans again. And sometimes for dessert, it's interesting. The Greeks don't eat dessert quite as much as we do. In restaurants, you'll find it, but more often than not, you'll for dessert you might just get a little dish of fruit, or very often some yogurt with honey, which is what this is. This is just local Greek yogurt with honey and some sesame seeds and crushed nuts on the top. So let's leave and see the rest of the island. If we head south, here's some of the landscape on the east side of the island, and you can see what the roads are like. I went down to this beach, which turned out to be somewhat of a mistake because several kilometers of the road were actually washed out, and you really needed a 4x4, which I didn't have. Um, but I had like a little Toyota or a Fiat or something. Um, and so it was the sort of thing where at some point you have to decide, am I going to, is it worse to go keep going or is it worse to go back? So I kept going and I, I was lucky. I got out. Um, but this is the beach with absolutely nobody on it. And perched up above it is a elegant church. That's the interior, and a balcony that just looks out over the ocean. So as it turns out, the road that I used to get out to get back to the main road was even worse than the one I took to get in, and it was much steeper. And there were a number of places where I really didn't. And I'm all by myself. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I got out. But it made me much more cautious about the other places in the island I explored. I tended to stick only to paved roads from then on. The other main town, in kind of in the middle of the island, is called Spor. There's only about 100 people there now, and it also has some unusual churches. This was a typical one, almost like a modern sculpture, just in the middle of nowhere by the side of the road near this town. But Karpathos is really known for beautiful beaches, not long uh, beaches like we have on Cape Cod with lots of sand. They tend to be gravel or pebble beaches, and they're usually very enclosed, which is nice because they're sheltered. The water is very warm, and they're surrounded by incredible dramatic cliffs, and they very often have history around them. A short walk up from the beach I was just showing you is this little Byzantine chapel to Saint Luke, which doesn't look like much, but when you go inside, the frescoes that you can see here are from the 13th century. So when you think of them in that perspective, it's kind of funny to see this just like near the beach parking lot, completely open for anybody to stick their head in. The The southeast corner, closer towards the airport, is where you will find the capital of the island, which is called Pigadia. It's a pretty decent sized port and mostly modern. Um, and about half the population of the island lives there. This is looking at it from across it. It has a broad bay, and it's pretty busy. It's a good base if you want a little more life in your vacation than I did. So if you want lots of restaurants and a little nightlife and some bigger hotels, it's a good place to stay. It has some ruins as well. This is a fifth century church, Christian church called Aya Fotini, back when this area was actually a major religious center. And very close to the town itself, there's a couple more little Orthodox churches perched up on the bluff over the harbor. And there's a little cemetery too, which is very pretty. There are plenty of goats, as I mentioned before. In fact, Greece has more goats than any other EU country. There are 4 million goats, which is about one goat for every three people in Greece. And for something a little bit more ancient, I climbed up like a goat up the cliff to this natural cave that was at some point in the ancient times. They don't really know too much about it. It was a shrine to the god Poseidon. And you can see there is a little cave. I actually spent half an hour on the wrong side of the road and finally found a guy who was kind of sleeping in his car and asked him if he knew where it was. And he pointed me to the opposite side where if I had gone there in the first place, it was actually very easy to find. Um, it's hard to know what this was originally used for because for a long time it was used by shepherds in the area. So it's probably been changed or damaged over the years, but it's impressive anyway. This is another one of the towns. This is called Menetes, kind of inland, another one of those towns that's protected from the coastline. And you can see the main capital down in the distance. And this town in particular is known for the pretty colors, just a wide variety of these sort of pastel colors. You tend to think of Greece as being only blue and white, but in the Dodecanese, it's not. You'll find all kinds of different colors. And in this town also, it has an enormous church, which was unfortunately closed the day that I was there. But it's an impressive Byzantine era church with this elaborate carving over the door. And again, just some exploring the town on foot. It was a very sleepy town because it's not on the beach, but very pretty. Lots of the typical narrow alleyways, very nicely maintained. And I was probably the only person walking around. If you want, you can head up above the town. You can either climb, there's a hiking path, or you can drive partway, where there's a spot that you can look down onto the town and you can see the big church, which unfortunately has this god awful concrete thing that they tacked onto the side. I don't know why. It really kind of spoils the view. And again, looking back down towards the capital, where it's really the only place on the island that has anything of any size. If we go back up the west, we're kind of making a loop around the island. It gets much wilder again if you go up the very the cliffy west coast of the island. And after a certain point, most of it is actually inaccessible. The road goes back over onto the east side. But before you get there, there's a couple of interesting towns. Off in the distance, this is a separate island called THASOS, which you can only get to, you can get to by ferry or plane, but the schedule isn't all that great, and you can't do it in a day. I wanted to go over and spend a day and come back, but it didn't work out that way. You would pretty much have to go and stay overnight in order to take a ferry or a plane back. So maybe the next time I'm there. And it's worth exploring this part of the island because one of in ancient times, there were, I think, 3 or possibly 4 important settlements. And this is one of them. This is called Arcasa, a deceptively small peninsula until you get up close to it. And You can hike up to explore what is left of the Acropolis that was once a fortified city on top of this little peninsula. Before you get there, there are a couple of interesting little chapels that still have mosaics from the Roman era in them. But if you get to the top, it's a short hike. It's not difficult, but there's you can see some of the foundations that are left over from the old city. There's not too much left, and sweeping views in every direction, and lots of sheep who are very sensibly, unlike me. The sheep were all trying to get in the shade. I'm walking around in the sun. They were very suspicious of me. But the views are really amazing. You can see this part of the island is much more barren. There's not a lot of trees or greenery here. But on either side, there's some beautiful beaches and a small kind of beachy resort town that has some hotels and restaurants. This is looking back from the shore. You can see it's a very logical place to put a settlement because it's very well protected. You can see anybody coming from almost any direction, and you only really have to defend this one small connection to the mainland. This is Othos, another little pretty mountain town. It is the highest town in the island, 1,500 feet up. Also, not much to do there, but admire the views and look at some of the pretty houses. I loved their church too. They had this beautiful sort of pale yellow church. And right across the street from it was this very bright, Instagrammable little house on the square. Hardly any visitors. Almost nobody was there. It also, you can see how high up it is. That's way off in the distance. That's the capital that we were in, the big town, just a little bit ago. But we're further up in the mountains now. I also headed up a little higher because for me, it's always worth it to be tempted to keep going. If there's a tall thing, I have to climb it. If there's a long thing, I have to go to the end. So I went along this kind of scary little narrow road that fortunately had no cars on it. In this picture, we are looking southwest, so you can very see the island I mentioned called THASOS, which is about an hour ferry ride away, or like a 15-minute flight. But way off in the distance, I don't know if you can see, there's a kind of smudge on the horizon. That is Crete. That is the very easternmost part of the island of Crete, which is the only other thing really anywhere near here. And you can only really see it on a clear day. There's some tiny, tiny, minuscule little villages way up high on a plateau that was covered with wildflowers. And just fantastic views down. You can see here's a couple of other churches, one there and one way up on the top. And this is looking down to another little line back up towards the village where I was staying. If you go down on the east side of the island, you can go down to a little beach town called Viafani, which was the original port for the village that I was staying in. So even back when they were trying to get away from pirates, they still needed access to the sea, and so that's what this town was. Very little there. It's just these days it's just a small harbor, a lot of boat trips that you can take from there, fishing trips and so forth. The sailing ship that you can see there is I had to look it up. It's called the Panorama. It's a very pricey small cruise ship that you can take. They do like mostly week-long itineraries around the Aegean, visiting out of the way kind of islands. And from their website, it looks like it runs about 4,000 per person for a week. So it may not be for everybody. I'm sure the food's delicious. The town has this fountain with a sort of nautical theme because it's a port, and this beautiful church. I love this church. That's the outside of it. You can take boat trips all around the island and to some of the nearby islands, but in early May when I was there, they really weren't doing that yet because It's just not really the high season yet. So what I did instead was a lot of hiking, and they have some beautiful hiking trails. This was my favorite one. This is actually not a difficult hike. At the very north tip of the island, it takes about an hour and a half one way. If you leave from a very small village called Avlona, you follow the old route, the old donkey route, um, down through a valley full of wildflowers. You can see the village off in the distance. And if you follow that past donkeys, you are heading towards the very northern tip of the island. And you can see actually that little bump in the distance is another little uninhabited islet called Saria. But where we're headed is down to this little bay there in the distance. It was once the site of one of Karpathos's other ancient fortified cities. It was called Vrukunda, and it's very old. It was inhabited way back in Minoan times, and it reached its height about the 4th century BC. Now there's nothing but ruins, the occasional dog and turkey. And there are some carved tombs that you can find as you get closer to where the site was. Here's some other ones. Um, there, other than me, the only people who were on that hike, I saw like there were a couple of Germans, but I passed them and then I never saw them again. So they either gave up and went home or died or something. I don't know. But I was I was the only person in this whole part of the island for pretty much the rest of the afternoon. When you get down to the very end, to the tip, you can see the uninhabited island off in the distance. But there's a good number of foundations left from back when the old city was there, as well as some more recent chapels, and an absolutely gorgeous little clear blue bay. But one of the main reasons to go there is that there is a cave church that is still maintained. And on the island, late at the very end of August, they have a big festival. And people from the village where I was staying, as well as the village where this hike starts, go down there and spend basically a whole weekend. They sleep overnight in this little spot, and for this big annual festival to St. John, Vrukunda. Some of the people hike, some take boats, and there are a few structures set up for the festival. But the church itself is just magnificent, and particularly to be there by myself. Like I felt like I was the only person on earth. This is an ancient temple to either the goddess Aphrodite or Artemis. They're not really sure. And it long afterwards was turned into a Christian church, which is very atmospheric and fairly large as well for a church the location it's in. Water dripped down from the ceiling through the rock into the holy water font. And really, the only other creatures anywhere near there were a few braying donkeys sort of ambling over the very barren rocks. And this is looking back up the coastline, roughly to where my village is located. It's kind of in there, roughly. I communed with I love donkeys, so it was nice to commune with them, although they were a little skittish of anybody who bothered to go that far out. The weird plant that you can see on the right, um, I got very excited when I saw this until I realized that they were everywhere. I thought, oh my God, look at this incredible plant that I found. And then I discovered like every 10 feet, there was another one. Found out, I had to look it up. It's called a dragon arum lily. And I was lucky to be there at the time when they were blooming. And that one was probably a good 3 feet high, at least. But lots of other wildflowers as well, like these poppies. This is another one of the beaches, kind of near where the village I stayed is. The island that you can see off in the distance, if you can see that smudge, This is looking in the opposite direction. So now we're looking east. That's the island of Rhodes, which is a very big and very populated island with incredible history. Um, I'd be happy to take you there sometime. I was there a couple of years ago, 2, 3 years ago, and it's a fantastic place full of history. So it was kind of interesting to see it often way off in the distance from the isolation of Karpathos. But this island is mostly known again for its natural beauty, beautiful little beaches for swimming, isolated villages. This is that little port town that I was talking about earlier. A few lonely olive trees. They don't, because it's such a steep island, there isn't a lot of agriculture there. Most of it is sheep or goats. So there's cheese making, certainly. There are olive groves, but not a lot of them, just because the climate is fine, but the land is not, because it's very steep. And there's not a lot of wine making either. Again, I think there's one winery on the island, but it just the geology of the island just doesn't lend itself to much agriculture because it's so mountainous. I think this is the last village I'll take you to. This is a little one called Mesochori, and I decided it's very underrated. Nobody goes there. It's perched about 500 feet over the sea, where these little chapels are. And if I go back, I wouldn't mind staying there. It had some pretty little churches in Tavernas and amazing views. Again, my village was on the opposite side of this bump on the north side, but it probably takes a good hour to get from one to the other. Lots of little alleyways to explore, beautiful church again. This is pretty much all there was. So I think if you wanted something traditional like Olympus, where I stayed, but not quite as remote, I think this would make a good choice. Some more little coves. The swimming was incredible because the water was in May, the water is already quite warm. And most of these little beaches are very protected from the wind. So they're very nice places to jump off the rocks, sit there. And I'm going to end by just showing you one last little hike that I took after I'd been there for a few days. So this is going south from the village I stayed in on the old original path. So remember, I talked about the paved road. Before that paved road was put in, this is how you got elsewhere on the island. You either went down to the port and took a boat, or if you went by land, you would either walk or take a donkey along this trail. And you can see parts of it are just a rocky path. Some of it is still fairly nicely paved stones. Uh, it's got spectacular views, not a lot of elevation change, which was good. So you're up high, but there wasn't a lot of climbing up and down. So it wasn't too difficult to hike. This is looking back towards the village. And I did it late in the afternoon, which is the best time to be there because the sun is starting to set and the light is particularly beautiful. I went about, I don't know, maybe 4 miles, 5 miles before I turned around because I didn't want to be there in the dark. You can imagine what it would be like to be here um, in the 1970s, back when the road was built. Um, this would have been just like the other end of the planet. So yeah, basically, other than a boat, this is how you would have gone somewhere. And there were beautiful views down to these little isolated coves. There's really no way to get here except by boat. And because again, at the time of day, the sky was it was starting to sun was starting to set, so the sky's turning pink. And I turned around and went back. So here's a few last shots of the village turning gold in the setting sun. I really think it rivals Santorini for drama. And you are very likely to have it not necessarily to yourself, but you won't see any cruise ships. You won't see any big tour buses. You'll see little old ladies and some unbelievable sunsets. I think you can just see that's my place right there. I don't know if you can see. There's a few cliff chapels below the town that you can go down to see, and it was very pretty to kind of sit up on top of them and watch the sun go behind uh, down in under the horizon. The the photo on the right, I got lucky with this photo. It looks like a volcano, but it's not. It's just a cloud, but it's the sun hit it at just the right way behind this mountain, so it almost looks like an erupting volcano. And the sun turns just blood red before descending behind these. Again, these are just uninhabited little rocks off in the distance. And this is what my village looks like at night. Very peaceful, very quiet. If you have a bottle of wine with your dinner, you have to be kind of careful walking home. But other than that, it's very safe, very peaceful, very quiet. So I think, yeah, that's the end. I'm going to stop sharing. And then if anybody has any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.
Christine said, thanks for the vicarious journey to these beautiful Greek islands, Jeff. Sorry we're not on camera, having bandwidth
Oh, yeah.
issues.
Actually, I know Christine and her husband, so I'm going to see her next week, so we'll talk about it then.
Anyone else have
Anybody
any
else?
questions or comments for Jeff?
Hey Jeff, can you hear me?
Yep.
So you said May is a good time to visit?
May depends on what you want to do. If you want to swim, um,
No, I
of
don't
course,
want to swim.
if you don't want to swim, of course, if you can swim in New England, you can. Greece won't be a problem. Um, but weather-wise, my favorite times in Greece are April, May, June, September, October, into November. Pretty much any time before Thanksgiving, our Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Hi, Priscilla.
Yeah.
I see her appearing in the back. Um, I think those are the best times to be there because, first of all, the weather is nice. It's not too hot. It's pleasantly warm without being too hot. The evenings can still get a little chilly, so take a sweater, but it's fine. If you want to swim, the ocean is probably okay. In the spring, the wildflowers are everywhere. So that's a particularly nice time to be there. And in the fall, there are different wildflowers in the fall, not as many, but that's when you start to get into the olive and the grape harvest. So
Okay.
that's also kind of an interesting time to be there because those activities are going on. Summer is beautiful, but it's more crowded, more expensive, and oh boy, is it hot. Really, really hot. So definitely spring and fall are when I would advise going.
And what was the name of that town that you said would recommend for staying if you wanted to be a little less remote than Olympus?
Um, oh God, you had to ask me.
Is it
I can find out in just a
Mesopotamia?
minute.
Mesoshori.
Meso
Mesoshori.
Mesoshori?
Mesochori, Mesochori, which means middle village.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, it's pretty much the only village on that side of the island um, until you get up to where we are. Olympus is not. It's not really. I wouldn't say it's isolated. It's not like. It's just distance wise, it's a long way from everything. So because it's at the opposite end of the island, if you want to do any exploring, it's pretty much an hour to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Which, if you're not in a hurry and like, that's fine. It's beautiful. But Mesohori is kind of in the middle, so you could do things in both directions without quite so much driving. And it was very pretty. But um, Olympos is the highlight, definitely the highlight of the island. It's the most picturesque of any of the villages.
Okay.
And
So,
you can take a ferry there, but from Athens, if you take a ferry, it's a good 22 hours. So no,
okay.
I flew. um, the plane is like maybe 45, 50 minutes. Yeah.
So let's say in May that two Americans go to the island and they don't speak any Greek. Are they going to have any trouble? Yeah.
No. Um, it's always good to learn a few phrases, but pretty much if you learn any Greek, like hello, goodbye, a few basic phrases, your village is beautiful. Um, they will instantly
Do you
love
speak
you.
English?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If you can say
Respect.
that,
Yeah.
if you put that much effort into it, they're going to just think you're the greatest thing, and they're going to love you. If you tell them that you're from Boston, they're going to want to talk about their son and make sure that you go to their restaurant. But no, most places in Greece, unless you get really off the beaten track, most places in Greece, um, people will speak at least some basic tourist English. They may
Mhm.
not be fluent, but their English will certainly be fine for you to manage without any trouble. And Karpathos, as much as I talk about it being way off the beaten track, it's not that nobody goes there, but it's busiest during the summer. So if you don't go during July and August, you'll there'll be other people there, but it will be very relaxing. It will not feel the least bit overrun. And so if you go to a village, you'll kind of be a bit of excitement that there's actually somebody there.
Uh, I have one more question, not
Sure.
to monopolize, but
No, not at all.
so the rocks on the road, and you said the road was washed out in one place. Did you feel okay driving there? I mean, in a little
I'm
car?
used to it. So yeah, it doesn't bother me. I tended not to drive at night.
Mhm.
I would if I had to, but I think being there and being by myself without somebody else in the car with me
Yeah.
to say, hey, did you see that giant boulder? Um, it was in most cases I went off for the day and did my exploring, and then I was home usually late afternoon or early evening, and got into the village and then had supper and so forth on my own. So yeah, I would probably have been less comfortable driving there. There are guardrails and stuff. It's not that dangerous, but there's no streetlights. And the good thing is, it is actually very similar to where our house is. The good thing is, driving at night, you can see if there is another car, you can see them from miles away because of the headlights. The danger about driving at night is the animals because they don't have headlights. So if you can come around a corner and all of a sudden there's a flock of goats. Not so much goats at night usually tend to be in their place, but cows and
Yeah.
sheep may be wandering around. So nighttime driving is a little more. You definitely want to be cautious. But during the day, if you can drive in Boston, you can drive in Carpathos, as long as you're not afraid of heights.
Oh, well, thank you. Looks like a wonderful place.
I highly recommend it. I don't want to recommend it so highly that it gets busy. I want to keep it in the middle. But yeah,
Okay,
I think of all
don't
the
write a
islands I've been
best-selling
to,
guidebook.
Yeah.
no, not a chance. I do think I've been to about 20 of the Greek islands at this point, and they're all different. It's hard to pick a favorite because they each have a different personality in there, But I think of all the experiences I've had, I think this was my favorite so far. But there's still another like I've got 150 more to go, so who knows?
We'll stay tuned.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good to see you guys.
Well, thank
Any
you,
other
Jeff,
questions?
so much. for tonight's presentation. It was fantastic, and I learned so much about the Greek islands. It was
When you get your
wonderful.
passport, you can head off.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thanks for joining me, everyone.
Thank you all again
Thank
for
you.
joining
Thanks,
us
Jeff.
tonight.
Yep.
Have a
Okay.
good one. Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.